Saludos! If you watch this channel on a regular basis, then you already know that I post a lot of videos on gangs and gangsters. And I've recently addressed some issues concerning criminal justice reforms and social justice. Now, I've interviewed quite a few cops and corrections officials in past episodes, and the feedback has been pretty good on those. But some of you have commented, what about cop gangs or cops who act like gangsters? And that's a legitimate issue, especially when criminal justice reform is concerned. And so I have quite a few episodes coming up on that very subject. So most of you already know, I know a lot of retired and presently employed police and corrections. And before I start, in their defense, the vast majority of the ones I know are very good people and really care about their jobs and the people they serve. One of the individuals I have interviewed from the East LA Sheriff Station is Captain Rodriguez. He grew up in East LA and cares a lot about people in it and making sure that they're safe. My wife's father lived less than a mile from Garfield High School for many years, so I know this area very well. I've been on ride-alongs with many agencies across the United States, including the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. In this case, with the East LA Sheriff Station, such as on this occasion depicted here, in the late 1990s, where a teenage gang member was caught in an alley and appeared to be getting some special treatment from a lady I would say was at least 10 years older than him. The swing shift deputies that I was riding with never ridiculed them or abused them, but they did swing around the other side of the alley and caught up to them as they were running in what they thought was the opposite direction. And while it appeared to me that they were engaged in lewd sexual acts, the deputies let them both off with a warning. When I got back into the vehicle, they told me that both were well known to them. One was a gang member, as I suspected, and the other one was a prostitute who was addicted to crack cocaine and would not seek help for her addiction. They patrolled all over East LA that day, and they told me that things were pretty quiet for a Saturday afternoon and evening, and they started to head back to the station when all of a sudden a call came out on the radio of shots fired. And so we raced down the street to where the 911 operator told us the incident was coming from. When we got there, there was already about 10 LA Sheriff deputies' vehicles there. And I saw a young man laying on the ground dressed in a tuxedo. This appeared to be a Mexican wedding, and it appeared he was hit. Medics were already on the scene taking care of the young man, and there were a lot of people crowding around, screaming and crying. The deputies spoke to their partners who arrived before them, got back in the car, and told me that their assistance wasn't needed. And then we headed back to the East LA Sheriff Station. It was towards the end of the shift, so it sounded to me like they were relieved they wouldn't have to do any paperwork. I've also toured the LA County Jail, Twin Towers, and the old gang module, where atrocities are alleged to have occurred by LA Sheriff's Department deputies who worked within the correction system. Again, all the staff that I encountered were very professional. Now, you might say they were only on their best behavior because I was there taking the tour. Perhaps, but I can only go by what I saw and heard. And I can tell you that I have heard from a lot of LA Sheriff's deputies, as well as other agencies that I will cover in this series, and they are also appalled at the behavior of some of these officers. So before you go off saying they all just cover each other's backs, I don't think that's so. I myself and many other officers I know have reported these individuals, but there's a lot more to it than that. And we'll talk about some of those issues here in these next episodes. About 10 days ago, the LA Times reported that a judge ruled in a large lawsuit filed by 8 former LA Sheriff's Department deputies, and he stated that their lawsuit could move forward. Basically, this lawsuit says that they were harassed, mentally and physically abused by alleged members of a deputy gang. And just like any other case, these stated individuals are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. The lawsuit alleges that several deputies assigned to the East LA Sheriff Station, also known as Fort Apache, were pressured to quit the force after they complained about being assaulted by senior deputies who belonged to a group known as the Bandidos. Their lawsuit mentions a now notorious incident that is said to have occurred at the Kennedy Hall, located just northeast of Garfield High School in East LA. The lawsuit states that on September 28, 2018, the East LA Sheriff Station hosted an off-duty celebration at the hall for new deputies. It is alleged, as was past common practice, that LA Sheriff's Department deputies would jump or beat in newly graduated deputies, just like gangs often do, and just like college fraternities often do in a ritual known as hazing. Deputy secret societies have been documented since at least the 1970s, and they were mentioned in an official report by Special Counsel James G. Holtz in 1992. If you remember that time period, that was the year of the Rodney King riots. That involved the LA Sheriff's Department, Los Angeles Police Department, as well as many other departments in the greater Los Angeles area. The late 1960s, early 70s was a period of great unrest in East LA. You had the 1968 high school walkouts, where Chicano youth felt that they weren't getting the education they deserved. There was also the August 29, 1970 Chicano moratorium against the Vietnam War. This was a march in East LA that drew an estimated 30,000 demonstrators, and there was rioting at the end of the march in what was then Laguna Park, but what is now known as Ruben Salazar Park, named in memory of a popular Mexican-American journalist with the LA Times who was killed by a tear gas projectile fired by LA Sheriff's Department staff when they tried to regain control of the area. Steve Lucero, who I had on a previous episode, was present at this march, and he told me what happened was some youngsters stole some beer from a store. The store owner reported this, and the cops showed up. This basically incited the crowd, some who were intoxicated and high, and many who were already angry against police and the system, and they began to riot. Salazar had sought refuge inside the Silver Dollar bar and was sipping on a beer when he was struck by the projectile and killed. This incident just added credibility by many in East LA and many Chicanos that the system was against them, whether or not you agree with that. In 2012, a report by the Citizens Commission on Jail Violence also talked about brutality within the LA County jail system. It noted that for years, management has known about and condoned deputy cliques and their destructive subcultures that have undermined the core values articulated by the sheriff. It went on to say these factors have contributed to forced problems in the jails, as well as numerous off-duty incidents involving deputies. In addition, the Office of the Inspector General's 2018 quarterly report on reform and oversight efforts of the department encouraged the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department to implement several recommendations, including the department should discourage participation in destructive cliques. Yet, as evidenced by the investigation, which is the subject of this report, Sheriff Villanueva continued to promote a code of silence regarding these subgroups. The Kennedy Hall incident investigation uncovered evidence that these deputy cliques have undue influence over the daily activities and assignments of the East LA Sheriff's Station. Now, publicly, Sheriff Villanueva stated that he does not condone such groups. And I know he has watched my channel and seen some of my public comments because he has commented back on them when I state that corruption exists in most all agencies in the United States, including police and corrections departments. In other words, there's always going to be some bad apples. Several witnesses identified deputies involved with the Bandidos clique. And like I said, these cliques are not new. An internal LA Sheriff's Department memo dated December 5th, 1973, documented the existence of a deputy clique called the Little Devils, many who subsequently had a tattoo of a little devil on their left calf, where it could not be seen on duty, but could be seen in a locker room. The investigation concluded there were at least 43 members of the Little Devils, and the report identified 38 of them by name. Now, I know there has always been groups that have been very anti-cop or anti-corrections, but I think it's important to listen to some of their claims. According to some of these groups, members of these deputy cliques have killed at least 19 people, all people of color, and they have documentation on this. You can look it up on the internet and choose to believe what you will. Now, with the LA Sheriff's Department and many other police agencies in the United States, you have to work in the jail for a couple of years before you hit the streets. In some other agencies, you go to a separate academy, a corrections academy, and you stay within the corrections division. There are pros and cons to both. Now, I've actually spoken to former Sheriff Lee Baca a couple of times at conferences. I don't know if he remembers me or not, but I sure remember him. He was real tall and thin and balding, and he always was very cordial with me. He was even named Sheriff of the Year once, but eventually he was found guilty by the federal government of engaging in a cover-up when they investigated abuse by jail guards. I won't even call them corrections officers. And due to him being found guilty of obstruction in the FBI investigation, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison in 2017. Baca had assigned Paul Tanaka as his undersheriff. Now, I don't recall ever meeting Tanaka personally. He was basically the number 2 guy in the entire department who oversaw the jail division. Some state that Tanaka was a member of the Vikings deputy clique, or gang, however you want to call them. He was also found guilty of obstruction and forced to resign in 2013. He was sentenced to prison in 2016 for basically doing the same thing as Baca, obstruction of a major federal investigation. Tanaka was released from prison in 2021. In addition, at least 21 former or presently employed LA County Sheriff's deputies were convicted of federal charges in that same case. So here you have the top two administrators allegedly being actively involved, condoning or covering up. You would think that these high-level prosecutions would have caused these administrators and their subordinates to halt these types of activities and for the LA Sheriff's Department to clean up their act. Yet, only a few years later, the Kennedy Hall incident is alleged to have taken place. Again, there's a lot of people who scrutinize cops and corrections. Always has been and always will be.
And there are some new allegations against the deputy involved in Guardado's case who did not fire his weapon. Civil rights attorneys accuse Christopher Hernandez of being part of what some call a sheriff's department clique or gang.
While I was bedridden, I started researching the history of the gangs in the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, and I found out that this dates back at least 50 years. I spent 6 months researching deputy gangs within the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Conservatively, I estimate I read about 100,000 pages of legal filings. And what I came away with was a 15-part series detailing 18 gangs that I was able to confirm the existence of within the department.
Tom Yu is retired with the LA Sheriff's Department and currently works in the legal field, specializing in police cases. And he's going to explain to us what exactly the new definition in California says a cop or law enforcement gang is. Tom, what can you tell us about that?
So, well, Gabe, there's a very nuanced way that the California lawmakers prohibits a law enforcement gang or a deputy gang, however you use the term, but essentially is any kind of groups or cliques by individuals. But also the requirement, Gabe, is that it's not just you belonging to a group or a clique, but that group or clique has to be formed specifically to violate citizens or people's constitutional rights. So in other words, if I want to become, for instance, there's motorcycle clubs out there, right? And there's clubs for Marine Corps vets, clubs for Mongos, clubs for deputies. There's deputy motorcycle clubs. Well, that's not illegal. That's all good under the law. But if that club or group or cliques are formulated to violate people's rights, then that becomes illegal. And the question is, well, what about these deputy sheriffs who have station tattoos? And just like in the military, just like in other organizations, there's common signs or symbols. It doesn't make them gang members. That association, the fraternity or that group is not made up so they can go and violate people's civil rights.
Got you. So people have freedom of expression. We have First Amendment rights, and we have the rights to wear whatever clothing we want. And as you stated, whatever tattoos we want to put on. Even neo-Nazi groups have freedom of expression rights. A lot of people are upset about that, but that's something in this country that we have that doesn't exist in a lot of countries. Sounds like you're saying as long as you don't violate the law or violate other people's rights, then that's okay to have a group like that.
Well, yes, a good example. I mean, I don't think any cop should be targeting citizens to violate their rights, whether you belong to a group or not in a group. So if you have a deputy sheriff, for instance, in LA County, whether they're part of a group, subgroup, clique, association, fraternity, if they violate people's rights, they have to be held accountable. So at the end of the day, for me, I specialize in defending police officers. So whether or not that officer or deputy violated someone's constitutional rights, to me, the analysis isn't what group do they belong to. The analysis and evaluation is what did they do, not what group they belong to. Because if what they did is against the law or policy, then they're going to be held accountable.
I appreciate you coming on the show and explaining the legal definition requirements for being a cop gang and I will read it here in just a minute. Exact law, it was written, and you and I are in agreement. We have a lot of good cops out there. They all shouldn't be painted with the same brush. I think we can agree if they're doing things against the law, then should be held accountable. But if they're not, they should not be persecuted, exercising their own personal rights.
Exactly. I couldn't have said it better.
Thank you, Tom, for coming on the show. Penal Code 1370 states, a law enforcement gang means a group of peace officers within a law enforcement agency who may identify themselves by a name and may be associated with an identifying symbol, including, but not limited to, matching tattoos, and who engage in a pattern of on-duty behavior that intentionally violates the law or fundamental principles of professional policing, including, but not limited to, excluding, harassing, or discriminating against any individual based on a protected category under federal and state anti-discrimination laws, engaging in or promoting conduct that violates the rights of other employees or members of the public, violating agency policy, the persistent practice of unlawful detention or use of excessive force in circumstances where it is known that it is unjustified, falsifying police reports, fabricating or destroying evidence, targeting persons for enforcement based solely on protected characteristics of those persons, theft, unauthorized use of alcohol or drugs on duty, unlawful or unauthorized protection of other members from disciplinary actions, and retaliation against other officers who threaten or interfere with the activities of the group. Again, this lawsuit is still pending, and I know many times these types of cases are settled out of court, which never really clarifies who is guilty or innocent of what. But I understand why a lot of times people settle, both the plaintiffs and the accused. According to this lawsuit, the bandidos consist of at least 90 deputies, many of them who are inked with matching tattoos of a skeleton with a thick mustache, holding pistolas with cross-bullet bandoliers. The lawsuit also states that 30 of the 90 alleged bandidos members have at one time or another retired or quit due to scrutiny. The lawsuit alleges that the bandidos ran the East L.A. Sheriff Station like inmates running a prison yard. In other words, they were bullies. Again, former Sheriff Alex Villanueva himself acknowledged the influence of the bandidos at the East LA Sheriff Station, saying that they ran roughshod over previous supervisors, including shift captains, and that they pressured these captains and via their union to decide which deputies were assigned where. Villanueva stated that they were pretty much calling the shots, and that was a very bad outcome, obviously. It is stated that the bandidos even have OGs, like gangs do, based on seniority. OG means original gangster, and that these individuals are looked up to by younger members of the bandidos. The lawsuit also states that a lot of deputies were afraid to refuse to join the group, and that if they did not, they might get in trouble when they had a situation where they needed backup. Some members of the bandidos went by monikers like G-Rod and Bam Bam. There was even one allegedly called the Godfather. Now tell me that doesn't sound just like gangs. One witness even alleges that they were confronted when they wore East LA marked clothing, and that bandidos did not want them wearing such clothing, much as gang members don't like non-gang members wearing their colors and insignias. The 8 deputies are currently asking for at least $80 million, as well as seeking changes in policy and changes in supervision that might prevent future incidents, such as what happened at Kennedy Hall. And as is understandable, all 8 of these deputies had asked for and were granted transfers to other stations. Alex Villanueva lost his re-election campaign to remain working as the LA County Sheriff in November 2022 to former Long Beach Police Chief Robert Luna. In February 2023 of this year, Luna announced the appointment of a former federal prosecutor to look into problems with deputy cliques and other problems in the department. He stated that he would have zero tolerance for this type of conduct. I have monitored police communications in regards to the Villanueva Luna election, and it appears to me that many deputies are upset that Luna won and that they fear he might go headhunting or turn out to be a micromanager. On the other hand, it appears that the public did not trust Villanueva to clean up the LA Sheriff's Department. Luna is viewed as being an outsider, and perhaps they're worried that he might try to change the LA Sheriff's Department culture and status quo. Meanwhile, Alex Villanueva is considering running for LA County Council himself in 2024. So politics in LA County continue to remain interesting and important, and you can be sure that I'll be watching. In my next episode, I will cover the Rampart scandal in the Los Angeles Police Department. I will follow up from that with an episode on the Green Wall in the California Department of Corrections, where I used to work. I hope you found this episode to be both educational and to be a fair assessment of the current situation. I have a lot more for you coming up. Now, this is Gabe Morales signing off. Gangsters, cops, and politicians.